So harimai everyone to this Common Ground event that where we are hosting Neal of Latitude to speak with us about regenerative real estate. I'm just going to do some introductions before we jump into the presentation. So ko Appalachia te Maunga, ko Chesapeake Bay te Awa, ko Atlanta te Moana, ko Rose te Hapu, ko Zola aho. Tutawa mai I Ronga, tutawa mai I Raro, tutawa mai I Waho, tutawa mai I Roto. Kia tō ai te mori tū, te mori ora ki te katoa. Homie huie tai kie. I summon from above, below, within, from outside the environment to calm and settle the vital in our essence and the well-being of everyone. Be joined together, united. So wonderful for you all to be here with us today. Just a bit about Common Ground. I started it in 2019 as a social enterprise to both address the issues that I was seeing in housing in Aotearoa and move us to more sustainable, connected, and affordable ways for us to do our housing and our communities. And we offer consultancies to anyone who's doing housing, whether it be government, developers, housing providers, and even community groups. And we also have compassionate communication workshops, because that's part of getting to that place of being able to live cooperatively. We need to be able to communicate that way. For those of you who are doing housing professionally and you'd like to join a consortium of others who are working for housing in service to life, we might call it regenerative housing. I do have a consortium, and there's a page on the website. You can check that out. It's really about us working together and sharing our knowledge with each other. There's a YouTube channel where I host the videos that we have from these kinds of presentations. And I always welcome people to join me to be a part of these presentations, and you can get your very interesting projects or your perspective on how housing can be. And if you sign up for the newsletter, I send out weekly or bi-weekly, hopefully resources that you find inspirational as well as informative. And if you're a woman working in this space or interested in housing, we have the Women Revolutionizing Housing Network, again, hosting learning and networking events. To let you know, if you're in this area, top of the South, or even Aotearoa, we have the Natural or Earth Building Conference. We have hopefully Verena joining us at the end of the month to talk about her role as an earth builder, who's a professional working in the space, and she's one of the coordinators of the event. So that'll be next month. And I'll put details of that on the Common Ground website. And then the call to action for those of us that are living in Aotearoa, it is our time of electing our local representatives, as well as them putting into place whether it be the future development strategy or other similar decisions that they need to be making on how we do our development and then our housing as well. So this is a great opportunity to upskill yourself in the ways that we can develop differently, with today being one of those days, as well as on the YouTube channel, you'll find others, and to really engage with our elected members and with our councils to be able to help them to understand what it is that we need and how they can do things differently. And again, I'll be writing a series of newsletters that hopefully guide you in some of the language, the strategies, even some examples of what you can bring to these powers that be so that they can be guided in the right way. Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to introduce Neal now, and then he's going to introduce our topic. So real estate is actually another key player in this regenerative, being able to make it a whole shift, because we can't, create the homes, but then they can't get sold, or people don't understand, or all the beautiful spaces that people have built up. And then when somebody else buys it, they cut everything down to, and so we need a whole guild ecosystem of role players. And I'm excited to see that what I actually didn't hold very fondly, the real estate profession originally. That's why I'm so drawn to you, the work that you're doing, because I haven't seen it do the best for properties and how we think of housing. And I think what you're doing is putting everything on it. And that's why I think it's important to share more about how you're doing it. And we certainly need it here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is big, transformative piece. So I've brought you to share with us, and hopefully you're going to spark something that's like becomes like wildfire in this country.
It's truly a pleasure hearing everybody talk. What it really reminds me of is that what this is more cross-cultural collaboration and methods of inquiry. Because it sounds like if you were to poll people where I am, we'd have very similar interests and very similar entry points. And that is heartening as well as dispiriting in the fact that we're all having to deal with this around the globe. You have a beautiful way of introducing yourselves in this community, and this is the first time that I've heard that introduction, but how I like to start off is just a land acknowledgement of where I am, so that you can also orient yourself to where I'm zooming in from, which is on a small island near the US-Canadian border in the Pacific Northwest. Its colonial name is called Whidbey Island. It's about an hour north of Seattle, but is the ancestral lands of the Coastal Salish people. And so this is really a way that we try to first honor a framework that we like to view in the real estate industry, not of ownership, but of stewardship. And I think what you do to introduce yourself to the community is an amazing way just to ground yourself within that perspective, that we're just a blip and a point in time. And how I really like to get into this is also to acknowledge that if you were to tell me 15 years ago that I was going to be talking to a group of people about my work in real estate, I would have laughed. I got a lot of flack after leaving our graduate school and in going into real estate. I had a stint in between there where our work, my partner Alyssa is on this call. I thought I saw her, but our work took us overseas to India and to the Maldives. And we thought that we were going down this path of the nonprofit worker. And had a really amazing experience in India. And two things that stuck with me, and I like to mention this, is that real estate was not on my radar until I had this experience in India where we were touring these properties, and they were talking about how they were designing for cool breeze to come in from the tree-lined streets that would just heat would rise up the center of these properties. And it was really situated for multi-generational housing. And on the roof, it would capture rainwater, and it would go into a limestone cavern underneath these properties that would naturally treat the water to make it more potable. And so that's a pretty formative experience where you realize that we're not talking about that in the United States. Sustainable design 10 years ago may have been a very fringe, what would be considered a hippie movement at the time. It's getting a little bit better, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily mainstream, but we've made great strides. And while overseas also, we had the opportunity to work with a female tree growers cooperative. And this was a time that we got to really experience what it's like for marginalized people that have been disempowered from land ownership, decision-making, money-making, to really put a path of self-reliance forward, and to be able to earn money for their first time, and to make family decisions, and to see what happens on a community-wide scale whenever you actually put marginalized people first. And so I just wanted to put that seed into this conversation of these are the conditions that we start to realize that those experiences never leave us. And a mentor of ours said, well, I told to her, it seems like we're the sum of our experiences. She says, no, Neal, we're the sum of our experiences that we process. And so what we're doing with regenerative real estate is it's real time, me processing with Alyssa, processing with Nick, and I see Jen on here as well, of how do we come together as a community to think about what does it look like to put forth a regenerative concept into the world as it relates to housing, land, place, and space. And I want to bring up our work in the Maldives, which was around community development and how it meets climate change adaptation. And the Maldives, if you're not familiar, is the small island community in South Asia that will be inundated with sea level rise. And their plan, I guess plan B, is to relocate their population of 350,000 people to the middle of Australia. That doesn't seem like the best climate change adaptation plan. But if you were to go in and you were to do green building in all of the Maldives and decarbonize their energy sector and to put on solar panels and green roofs across the entire country, it's not going to stop the sea from rising. And that is exactly where I started to realize that we can be doing really good work, what we consider to be good work. But if we don't start to look at how our own culture operates and what's going on in our own backyard and our own communities of where we came from back home, then other countries are not going to have a chance at all. And we made a very conscious decision of where is the power concentrated within our society? Because we would start with a nonprofit project, and for those of you that are in the nonprofit sector, if that's what you call it there, you'll be very familiar to this phenomenon of you come up with the most amazing project and you design it and you craft it and you think through it and you itemize and budget and come up with what you think is going to be amazing, and you bring it out to the world and you need to get it funded. And by the time that you have finished your pitching, you realize to get the money, you actually have to cater towards something completely different. And it's not the same project that you had conceived. You're now catering towards what the donor is really looking for with their agenda. And you just end up frustrated. And that was a model that I was particularly not very keen on pursuing after writing countless grant after grant and conceiving of all these programs. And so we made a very conscious decision to go into the real estate industry, which knowing full well that this is an industry that has raped the land, has marginalized people and communities, and generally spouts off a lot of platitudes where we are, at least. And a lot of our work has been informed from having to go into the belly of the beast. And I'm not going to lie, whenever we got into it, we had to learn the conventional industry through and through. And along the way, we lost our way, I think is the best way to put it. We really wanted to learn how to go out and fundraise for a project and to purchase and own a property, and what is it like to put forth rental housing. And we realized that the real estate industry is a lot easier to raise money for, because you can go out to people and say, I want to borrow your money. I want to secure it against collateral that if I don't pay you back, then you can get this asset. And then whenever I'm done, I'm going to pay you back your money and then some. And that's a really revolutionary concept for a nonprofit worker. As you deepen into that, you realize that it's a debt-based society, and it's fraught with a lot of complications and problems there. I'm not going to get into that because that we could be here for a couple weeks. But that was our beginning. And we thought, wow, maybe we could just go put better housing options out there. And for somebody that was making a very meager income as a nonprofit worker, I was really struck by this thought that we could create our own livelihood. And real estate does this amazing kind of allure of passive income and There's no ceiling to your income potential. And that draws a lot of people in. And it draws a lot of people with maybe not the best intentions, but I will say it draws a lot of people in that have really good intentions too. And what gives me a lot of hope is that there are those of us on the call that are working in this industry that have very good intentions, that are really looking to change the culture. And I think that's why we're all called to be here today. So a little fast forward in our story a little bit more is that we ended up growing a rental portfolio, which turned into we needed to manage rental housing, which means we need staff. And whenever you take on staff, your expenses grow. And so you need to go find more revenue. And you're just kind of on that rat race. And by 2019, we looked up and we realized that we had 27 people with us managing several hundred homes, really soul-sucking work. It was a complete slog. We're working with real estate agents that are trying to figure out how to put their feet on the ground. And meanwhile, we found ourselves just spouting off the same platitudes that every other we call them real estate agents in the United States. But you probably get a similar thing there, which is our job is to help you find your dream home. Or we're here to help you sell your house for the most amount of money in the least amount of time. And that's it. That's about as deep as the industry will go. And what it took for me was a sincere wake-up call to realize that I hated the business that we had built. Somebody described this experience as the soul descent, the dark soul descent that they've had a couple of in their lives. And I really like that soul descent because we hit it not only from the business side, but we hit it because four of our 6 very close elders in our life came down with a terminal or a debilitating lifelong cancer diagnosis. And that hit at the same time that we just had a new baby. And we started to dig into the research and realize that this is truly a pandemic where about 100 years ago, it was not that common to have cancer at the rate that we have it now. In the 70s, only about 1 in 20 people were getting cancer. And today, in 2022, 1 in 2 males are going to develop cancer. And it's marginally better for females, where it's 1 in 3. That's an alarming statistic. And it's no better for our children, where we started to realize that 54% of our children are going to develop a chronic disease that they're going to be dealing with for the rest of their lives by the time that they're 17. Before they're 17. And that's also a terrible statistic whenever you've got this newborn baby and you start to ask questions of what's going on. And you realize that this is how we're designing our communities and how we're designing our homes and our schools and our workplaces and the materials that are going into it and how we're growing our food and what's happening with all the externalities that's coming from industry. And a lot of this is exactly how I've come to realize that I work in the business of land and place and homes and habitats. And there's so much of this information that I had no idea. I mean, I knew that we had an energy problem and that we needed to have more solar panels and more solar hot water heaters and more energy efficiency. All those sustainability technology related things are good. But it was fundamentally missing a lot of the linkages that we were looking at, which was, how do we do this work in community? Because whenever you're working with your parents who have cancer and you hear that you could eat McDonald's Big Macs and do it in community, and you're going to be better off than the best nutrition and the best medicine, but doing that in isolation, we started to realize, like, there's people that are talking about biodiversity and cultural diversity and doing this in community and community-oriented housing and really rewriting a narrative of isolation, or as we like to call it in America, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and the rugged individualist. And we had a choice. We could either depart the real estate industry because it has such a nefarious and really not a great reputation, and we could try to figure out what we were going to do, or we could lean in and say, you know, if there is a concentration of wealth and power in this industry, and we can actually create change, and we can use existing structures, and maybe we can even reconceive of those structures to orient towards a new way of being, then let's stay in it. And let's see where this can go. And instead of calling it sustainable real estate, what if we started to borrow some terms that really connected on a soul level? And that was the field of regeneration, which, if you haven't put on that cloak of regeneration yet, what you'll realize is that this is an inward practice that just goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, that it is a fundamentally different concept than sustainability is. And I come from the perspective that I really don't like, there's this meme that's been floating around that sustainability is about doing less bad and regeneration is about doing good. If that's the definition, then we fundamentally missed what sustainability is all about. We have labeled good in a very subjective way, because what is good for you may not be good for me, and that's kind of what got us into this whole predicament in the first place. And so what we have really struck upon, that it sounds like there's a lot of similarities, and we're drinking from the same philosophical cup, listening to Zola, is that regeneration can be about attuning towards life-giving principles. And what's so amazing is that this shows up in all the ways in which you're showing up and coming here today, because you might be really interested in natural building, or you might be really interested in affordable housing, or maybe you have a chemical sensitivity and you realize that you can't live in any of the housing options that are in your town because they're all actually toxic. And the only choice is you can either go out and build a multi-million-dollar non-toxic house and spend years doing it and trying to educate your architect and your builder, or you can live in your car. I haven't been to your part of the world, but if you come to ours, you're also going to see we're at the last legs of this economic system, where we have houseless people on the streets. We have income disparity in such a large degree that I don't think we're ever going to catch up with it. So that's where I'm going to start my presentation. That was 3/4 of it, but Zola really likes slides, and so I want to be able to honor some slides that we do have. And these are more generative questions for you, but it's, what time is it in real estate? That's one that a mentor of ours named Ross Chapin, who is really a pioneer in my mind, that he started to realize we need to build smaller, and we need to orient our houses inwards instead of outwards, where we're activating our cars and our concrete. And so I think that's a great way to bring you in. Latitude Regenerative Real Estate is a sales brand, and people really want to know, what is it that you do? What's your metrics? And I want to push back on that, and everybody that's like going through their own maybe corporate process of how do we attune our workflow towards regeneration or towards sustainability. You don't have to measure it in the number of solar panels you put on a roof, or the number of lawns that you change over, or the number of units that you're building. That, first off, the number of units is like a complete disorienting way to talk about homes and habitats. And it is a math equation to some degree of how to build affordably, but we can do it with a little bit more dignity than the way the industry wants. But what we talk about is, how do we evolve the way that we're inhabiting the planet? And for a lot of us, that's a feeling within ourselves, and that feeling is a value set. And I want everybody just to be able to understand, like, these are our values and this is what can provide our compass. There's a lot of challenges. Somebody had talked about some of the legal structures and the challenges that are there. Like, we really need to first honor that we're living in a really complex society with large unprecedented challenges that the human brain has a really hard time to wrap itself around, much less elected officials that we've tried to get our point across to advocate that they're also not able to necessarily move off of from an area of statistics, but from an area of feeling. So that's a little bit of, I don't know, inside pro tip that I've come to find. And so where we picked this up is we started to talk about what is regenerative real estate. And the amazing thing is that we were always very place-based. And then we started to have people from across the country and the continent and even across the globe start to say, this really like, this hits me in my stomach. I love what you're talking about. This identifies a theme in my life. And I want to be able to join what you're doing. And for other real estate agents to say, I want to join what you're doing, that's just like the most nourishing thing that you can hear. But we couldn't actually do anything about that. Our business structure allowed us to work in this one particular state. And it was hard enough to figure out, like, we lived near a river that separated the state of Washington and the state of Oregon. It was a hard enough time to work between the two of them. But we kept going, and we kept putting out this theme of regenerative real estate. And we realized that regenerative real estate is really the reciprocity between people and place. And we were reading books. There's a great one that comes from Australia, actually, called Call of the Reed Warbler. It's about large scale land regeneration projects, doing ecological design and permaculture and rotational grazing and keyline design. And we started to read more Indigenous authors like Robin Wall Kimmerer, who talks in a book called Braiding Sweetgrass about this relationship. And we started to realize the environmental camp that we had grown up in and cut our teeth in and was working so hard to do good in the world, loved to have this narrative that the earth is going to be just fine without us. That we have caused such destruction that we're going to thwart ourselves off of this planet, and that's okay. Nature is going to rebound. And that's just a very bleak narrative. And I think that we've gotten that narrative wrong. And I think we have forgotten our role that humans can be and have been a keystone species in which creates life-giving habitat for the rest of life and a myriad of other species. And so if we can start to even frame that within an urban context of, are we showing up and are we taking more than we're giving? And some people are only taking, and they don't see themselves as part of the community, and they don't see themselves as giving back. And it doesn't have to be in the most profound ways. It can be as simple as an act of placemaking, of putting out colored chalk on your sidewalk so that kids that are walking by can stop to create a picture. It can be even deeper to where maybe you're not driving a car into work, but you're taking public transportation, or you're thinking more deliberately and intentionally about the actions that you're taking, and you're starting to realize, rain is hitting our roofs, and once it hits our roofs, our job is to channel it as far away and as fast as possible off site. And it's now considered stormwater. Yet across the globe, we're experiencing drought and forest fires on unprecedented levels. And so I think this is really what we need to hit upon, is how do we create a more reciprocal relationship with our places? And so what we do that is our regenerative real estate work is really as guides. So how can we use the real estate industry where people need homes? We are dealing with land and habitat. I consider agriculture a part of real estate, just as if you're to do a multifamily development or a mixed-use development, like it is using land and how we're culturally using land. So what we do is we seek to update this outdated system. Sometimes it doesn't look like what you would imagine a high performance home would look like. We certainly do that. But I like to liken this to how we raise children, and that if we're raising a child with our notions of what is good and bad and what we want them to become whenever they grow up, we're likely going to screw them up. But if we actually realize that we're trying to nurture the essence and the potential within a child so that they can become who their DNA has destined them to be, and we are okay with that, but we need to nurture and cultivate along the way, then we can take that same approach of how a community wants to organize, or how someone wants to be in a relationship with their home environment. And that's where I think that we need to start, especially if we're looking to create massive policy change as well, or to go work with landowners and develop pocket neighborhoods or tiny home villages or anything of the sort that I have heard. And how we're doing that is that we're really taking what we call the real estate agent, and we're flipping that on its head of how do we create more change agents, and how do we do that in communities so that we can start to cross collaborate and cross pollinate. And this is visionary work. This is about seeping ourselves in generative questions about what could be. And if you're going to do that, you're going to quickly find that you're a revolutionary. And if you start to talk about transmuting private wealth into the commons, if you want to explore something like a community housing land trust, like that is truly revolutionary work that is rooted in our times. And I like to see that real estate is merely an extension of our culture. So we need to start creating a different culture, and we need to start making change, and we need to stop taking it from a pontification and a theorization into let's get busy and let's start doing this on the ground, and let's start experimenting and what I love to call throwing spaghetti at the wall. And so the fun part right now is that within the United States, we've been doing this for about 2 years. We're represented in 15 different states with the community. I think we just passed a couple dozen change agents that are all these people that have this feeling that they need to create change, and they need to create a livelihood doing it, because we can't do this work for free. But we certainly can start to attune our business towards life, and in a way that really honors where we've come from, and exposes some of the atrocities that we've done along the way. And hopefully we can start to make a difference. And it's a pleasure to actually have people thousands of miles away, thousands of kilometers, excuse me. I don't know why we use that system still, but a very long distance away tuning in and saying, you know what, we're experiencing the similar symptoms over here. We're talking about climate change, and we're talking about affordability, and we're talking about policy and our poor policymakers. And really how I'm going to end this is because I was just on an affordability call before this, is that we're in an era now where I live that we cannot design our way into affordability. We cannot cut corners and use cheap enough material or pay our workers low enough wages to create affordability. And so what that means is that land has gotten so expensive that we have to come up with a new model. And it takes the brightest real estate minds and the blending of private funds and public funds to even think about doing an affordable housing project. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I could go on for a long time, but it is a pleasure to be here, and I do think that there's a lot of learning that can take place, even if we are separated by thousands of miles.
Oh, thank you so much, Neal. I just love how you gave us such a great story and all the philosophy behind it. It's not something that's a simple, just this is what it is. It is all about the weaving of all those bits of ourselves into what can take us forward.
I guess my question right now is, I'm really interested to hear, because I didn't get it from what you just said and perhaps I missed it, but what was the first step in terms of how you operated your business differently? I understand that there was that kind of bringing people together to talk about a different way of doing it, but what did you do differently in terms of buying and selling?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think it really starts with the kind of counsel that you give. Like, if you're just going to be a real estate agent, you can start at the very surface level of like, okay, we need to find shelter, right? What are your needs? How many bedrooms and bathrooms do you need for this house? And that is probably not the best surface level way to go into this conversation. If you want to just couch it within that very singular approach to, we have one family with one home, then how do we really orient our questions in a more appreciative inquiry method around what does life look like if someone is thriving? And then how do we actually deconstruct what do we need to do to create that place-based relationship with that family that's in that property? So we might be talking about healthy materials. We might be talking about resiliency, and what does that look like? And how do we, instead of going out and trying to find the cheapest designer or contractor, but how do we start to work with the people in the industry that have been waiting for the transactional side to show up? They're the folks that they hold the expertise and the knowledge to go out and actually provide the counsel to the people that are seeking it. And so one of the things about our industry is that whenever a property transfers ownership, about $80,000 worth of work happens on average in our country whenever that changes over. So we really first try to orient towards who is that ecosystem of service providers that we're working with that are value aligned, that can actually give that counsel. As if I know enough to be dangerous in a lot of different arenas, but if I am trying to counsel somebody on, this is the type of materials that you're using, this is the financing structure that you need to make this progress, then we really need to start attuning towards who are those professionals that are coming in and doing things very differently. Then whenever we start talking on larger scale projects of how do we work with housing developers and with city officials, and we start to first say, hey, we know, because we have data that can prove this, that there are amenities that you're not thinking about. What they're thinking about is, we just want to build the smallest amount of space to try to get the most amount of income on the back end. And we can start to even give them examples from eco villages that really hits their economic brain sensors, is the best way to put it, where you know, a developer, what they really want is they want to increase their income and decrease their expenses. And largely these eco villages, what they're doing is they have waiting lists 300 people long. And they're doing it in a way that really brings together community, and no one else is really developing co-housing or eco villages. No one's really trying to figure that out. And certainly in our country, there's only about 235 community housing land trusts that is actually decommodifying the land and separating that out from the houses. So how do we start to then work with these organizations that are desperate for either financing or for land, that we happen to have this special expertise of how do you put deals together, and where does the capital come from, and how do you go find the property to do it? And so those are just a couple, two ways that we can really start to change our vocation towards what are these really purpose-driven projects, or hell, we have a ton of agricultural land. Now, a lot of that agricultural land is toxic because we've been spraying pesticides and all kinds of other nasty stuff on it and just managing it poorly. But if we're having the greatest transfer of private wealth in our lifetime, because the baby boomer generation is now retiring, how do we take conventional property that is degraded and put it into the hands of the people that are looking to regenerate and revitalize and maybe do accessible housing for our agricultural workers? So these are just ways that we can pluck a single family homeowner, a developer, a multifamily landlord, or a farmer, or an organization, and say, you know what, we have expertise around land and money, and here's how we can help.
Okay, we'll take one more question and then we'll move into small group discussion. Anyone else have a question? Oh, yes, Jillian?
Hi, Neal. Sorry, I was a bit late coming in. I'm the chair of the Society for Cooperative Housing in Tauranga. And yeah, like cooperative housing doesn't really exist in New Zealand. But the National Association of Housing Cooperatives in America, you've heard of them, haven't you?
Sure, yeah.
So how does that relate with the 235 that you were talking about? They're quite a separate product. What is it?
Yeah, and so land trusts can start to blend in cooperative housing. And so cooperative housing is going to be an ownership structure where for those others that are on the call, you have an entity where instead of like a condominium or a homeowners association that we have here, where everybody owns their own unit within a community, a cooperative is, as we define it, and there might be some differences in the legalities where we are, that you are purchasing a share within a community of that structure. That has some pretty deep roots, especially within New York, where they've had a lot of cooperatives for decades now. But they're slow to catch on in different parts of our country. I think that this is one of the areas that has the most potential, as well as how do we start to really orient more professional help of maybe it's sociocracy, or maybe it's just more consulting around how do people work together to make community-based decisions. And we start to see this happen with market rate cooperatives, as well as affordable housing cooperative led projects, and how they're coming together. We just released a podcast episode last week about someone that they've been doing passive house design. So a very energy focused design approach to lower the energy requirements to heat and cool a building. But what he started to do is, how do we blend together this high performance design with cooperative ownership structure with a community housing land trust? And the result of that was that they were able to design a very high performance community for $10,000 down and $800 a month, which in the community that he was in is unheard of. And so as we can start to blend some of these structures together, I think there's just a lot of tremendous promise towards, I hate talking about solutions, because we think of solutions in my mind as like not having any externalities. There's no ramifications, but I think it does provide some solutions that could be really fruitful moving forward.
Oh, thanks.
Well, thank you. We've got two great questions, so we'll have two breakouts of perhaps 6 minutes each, and then we'll come together to just have last insights, and then hopefully end by 1:15. Amanda is asking, where do we find the podcast? So if you've got a podcast app already on your phone, I use Apple with my iPhone. I just use the search on the podcast app and it comes up. so I'm not sure whatever podcast app you use. I suspect you're across if you're on Spotify, Neal, do you know?
Yeah, I think we're on all the podcast pages, and I'll drop a link, or Nick, maybe you can drop something as well as the website that we have, and you can go find it there. And we've got a Mighty Networks community, and I really encourage people, if it's through Common Ground or if it's through Regenerative Real Estate, there's a lot of pollination that goes on there, and again, it's community work. It's trying out, we have somebody from co-housing over here, and we've got some like a farming group that really wants to do ecological farming. Like, how do we start to think about what can we create together with this? And the podcast is just ways in which I can go out and find those change makers that are doing maybe sometimes just very ordinary or extraordinary things, but on a very grassroots community level. And I think those are some of the funnest stories for me, because this is happening in every community across the globe, I hope. But now it seems like it's really trickling up, and it's great to see other professionals that can really start to bring their backgrounds to drive more change.
Oh, sorry, Joe, you got cut off. Did you want to just, I love you were saying about the layering. Yeah, what Joe was saying is our final is how do we layer all these great ideas? And it's fine. It doesn't have to be a this or that or that. We can say, they're all great ideas. Let's layer them all. And
yeah, Nick, I was just referring to, I love that idea of fusing different models together. So, and I think what I was just about to say was, rather than this duality, it's either got to be like the traditional way, or it's got to be like a cooperative. There's this nuanced area in the middle. And I think that's what this korero is inviting me to think about, is how can I, it doesn't have to be this or this, it can be somewhere in the middle. Because I have land that I'm kaitiaki of, and I'm thinking, well, maybe it's definitely got to be hemp building, but that's non-negotiable. But land trust and rent to buy model, actually looking at different models working together. I really love that idea.
Oh, that's great. Well, this is our chance to have one share out, and I know I've gone over our 1 minute, 1 hour 15, but I do think it's great to just end on a high note with each group sharing what was your main insights that you would like to bring to this large group. Group one, let's start with you. If you know that you were in room one, what would you like to bring to us as a 1 or 2 minute highlight?
Zola, it's Anne. I'm in Auckland, as said before. I think the opportunity to co-create a greater, better future with so many other ideas, the cross-pollination that was spoken about, and it's just delightful to be with like minds from all over. So thank you for this space.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne, for coming.
Yeah,
okay.
We were lucky enough to have Alyssa in our group, and so good to hear the other side of Neal's partnership. So that was really great. Thank you. And just for me, it was partly actually just listening to and hearing similarities in story across the globe. So, and like Neal said earlier, in some ways that's disheartening, in other ways it's heartening. So, but in either way, it's great to hear.
Yeah, and I think, and just to point on that, I think where we have a model that's working, I think let's work with that model than necessarily try to reinvent it. So one of the questions I had to Neal earlier was, how do we make it work here where we can work with Latitude, somehow take your model and make it work here, because I really think it's very important. And I'm not a real estate agent, but I'm a change agent. So I've got to figure out, my role within this. I think it's really important. And I hope that all of you leave with more questions than you were able to get answered, and that you carry on checking out and asking questions locally, how can we do this? And we can have another korero about this to keep this movement going. I really think it's valuable. It's just finding out the methodology that works for us here in this country and who are the role players we now need to invite to the next set of discussions. Okay, so room 2, was there any highlights that you had, or was that room 2, Daniel? Were you talking from room 2? You were room 1. Okay, so room 2, anybody from room 2?
I'm just really impressed that there's at least one real estate agent out there who's thinking this way, because I certainly haven't met anybody, not in New Zealand, but maybe they're out there. But it would be so useful to have more people on board so that when you do go to the council, you can say, well, this real estate professional agrees with us, And I was thinking about Brandy Gallagher from our Eco Village. She's a very persuasive and diplomatic person. She went to her local council and found just one person that would listen to her, and she was able to, over some time, get the zoning completely written up for eco villages. And so she was this, groundbreaking person who did it for her area. And so if she can do it, then it can be done anywhere. I should find out the wording for that zoning, because it would be really useful.
I've actually got that. Yeah, I got that. That was my little rabbit hole research yesterday. So in British Columbia, there's an eco village, Yarrow Eco Village. I don't know if that's the one you're talking about, but they actually did write and I have the copy of that zoning. So I can make that. Yeah, I'll make that available, because that's one of the other missions that I'm on, which is rewriting our zoning to accommodate comprehensive development. And this one specifically is called Eco Village Zone, which I think is also important to note. So I'll make that available. If you sign up to the newsletter, it will be in one of my articles, and maybe if I make it a resource on the web page as well, so you can get there quickly. But yeah, that's another thing we need to do. Okay, room 3. Who wants to share from room 3? Highlight.
That might be you, Zola. You had some
You're right. I did room 3. Well, I said enough. Yeah. Anyone else from room 3 like to share? Otherwise, we'll go to room 4.
Now let's go to room 4.
Okay, room 4.
I can share. So I really just loved just connecting with everybody around the globe. Like, it's such an amazing time and place to be a part of Latitude, because we seem to be, I think, like Ju may have mentioned, we're just this watering hole of people who are asking different questions, and the watering hole has brought so many different professionals where they have answers to projects like the Eco Village. The zoning of your area needs to be changed. Someone has done it. So if you have the question and someone who's done it, like, that's perfect pairing. And being able to connect with people like this and sit in rooms, it's amazing.
Yeah. Seeing, I see to have the attitude that anyone could be a potential ally, whether they be the council, municipality, whether they be a realtor, a banker, those who, usually put up the barriers or usually don't understand us. Actually, any of them have the potential to be an ally with just a little bit of conversation and relationship. And that's the way we're going to make this work, as we see who we need to bring on as allies. We work on those relationships. Like Raz is my mentor. He's in real estate, and he was just lit up as soon as he talked to Neal. He was like, yeah, I'm on board. That just took one conversation. Neal's also a great speaker. So I think that easy to get on board. But I think any one of us can take this spirit, and people get it. I think people find it quite enlivening, and yeah, I want part of this. So, well, I think that's a good note to leave it on, that we all do have that opportunity to make those relationships in our community with these concepts.